Well, this week's Bushel Up, we're going to continue talking about key nutrients in crop production here. Some of those you're looking at on your soil test. We're going to talk about potassium, the symbol K on your soil test, or you may see K2O. That's the available form that we're looking for our plants in the soil. But potassium is very important in plant growth. It's very important in the formation of cell walls, and that growth in plants. We see rapid potassium uptake. Whenever you see a plant growing fast, it's chewing potassium. And you know, the issue of falling short on potassium in our soils or not having enough potassium available is we sacrifice you know, stalk diameter, stalk strength in corn. If we don't have enough potassium late in soybeans, we start shrinking some of those beans. That's very important towards filling pods and filling beans is having enough potassium there at the end of the year. So with corn, we need it throughout that growing season, but really during that rapid uptake stage. With soybeans, we focus more on having it available late to fill those pods. So you know, the one thing about it is it's very mobile in the plant. Once we get potassium in the plant, it moves where we need it to go. That's not an issue. But we're relying on it coming out of the soil, and it's a cation. It's going to bind to the soil. We have large banks of potassium in our soil, depending on your soil type, but getting it available depends a lot on that soil type. If you're in a sandier soil, you may have a lot lower potassium levels, but you have a better availability as opposed to a heavy soil that may have a higher K value, but not as much availability. So really understanding not only what your levels are, but what type of soil are you on, and then what's the ratio of that with calcium, magnesium, some of your other big macronutrients. You know, we talk a lot about base saturations. That's a conversation for another day, but you know, that's kind of a buzzword, but I want to caution it's partly about what's your part per million, and it's partly about balance, and we'll talk about balance later on. When we look at removal, it kind of depends on the crop and depends on are you leaving the stover there or not. When we look at a 250 bushel corn crop, we're really only taking 60 pounds of potassium off. We're not taking as much as we are phosphorus, but if you start baling up those stalks, or if you're taking silage off, we can push that number to 150, 2.5, 3 times. So understanding if you're removing stover, then it's a whole different conversation about how much potassium you have to put on. Compare 250 bushel corn with 80 bushel soybeans. You start hitting those 80, 90 bushel soybeans, we're removing 100 pounds of potassium off, and that's being hauled to the elevator. So if you're in a 50-50 rotation, corn, beans every other year, you're going to see those levels drop a lot faster than a grower who maybe takes 2 years of corn, 1 year of beans, or maybe 3 or 4. So be aware of your rotation, be aware of what you're doing with your residue. Those will really impact your potassium trends over years and what we need to replace. Potassium, just like phosphorus, we rely on the roots to take it up. You know, the biggest thing is we have to have water, we have to have moisture, we have to have oxygen. So anything that compromises, we get too wet or we get too dry, we slow our potassium uptake. If we have anything that restricts roots, compaction, all those things that we talked about with phosphorus, hurt our potassium uptake. So be cautious of that. Also be aware that you know, potassium is not something we've had a lot of luck rescue treatments with. It takes a long time to get in that soil solution to become available to get back up in that plant. So rescue treatments aren't advised. This is something we recommend managing in the fall, early spring, or understanding your trends and having that potassium out there ahead of when the plant needs it, because once we're short, it takes a long time to get that back in the plant. And then we talk about just balance. Alluded to that a little bit, but you know, there is plenty of potassium out there, but it's just that availability. You know, what's exchangeable, what's soluble, what form is that potassium in. We like to keep some of those forms at all times, so we do recommend some potassium applications in areas where maybe we have enough in the soil, but we're just wanting to keep some different sources out there, some soluble sources that maybe are available to that plant. So these are just 5 of the considerations. There's a lot more about potassium we can go into, but just some of the high points today, and we'll continue next week with zinc.